The golden age of the Middle East can proceed right alongside of us. We will work together. We will be together. We will succeed together. We will win together. And we will always be friends.
Hello and welcome to The World. I'm Yalda and I'm currently in the Saudi capital, Riyadh.
And I'm Richard Engel and I am in Iran. It is great to see you, Yalda. I missed you last week and it's amazing. You're in Saudi Arabia where this amazing meeting, this big foreign policy speech happened from President Trump. I'm here in Iran. It was a big part of the speech. So much to talk about this week. And look at this setup. We're both right where we need to be.
Yeah, absolutely. We're both, as you say, at the heart of it. President Trump has arrived here in Saudi Arabia for what will be a 4-day trip across a number of Gulf states. He'll be here in Saudi Arabia until tomorrow. Then he moves on to Qatar and then the United Arab Emirates. And frankly, we don't know where we're going to end up by the end of the week because, of course, there's that challenge to Vladimir Putin to show up in Turkey as well. Donald Trump says he might go there if President Zelensky and President Putin meet face to face.
And one of the big headlines before we do is, I wasn't here last week. I'm sorry about that. Sorry, everyone. I was away. I was in Syria. And today, Trump just lifted sanctions on the new Syrian government. So I'm going to tell you what I was doing in Syria. Interesting. And I'll describe what this is going to mean for Syria and the future. Let's dig into it.
Before we get going, of course, follow us wherever you get your podcasts, Apple or Spotify. Send us any of your questions and thoughts, and Richard and I will discuss it here on the pod at the usual place, theworld@sky.uk. So, Richard, as I said, I've arrived here in Saudi Arabia because, of course, Donald Trump is back in Saudi Arabia to make his first diplomatic tour of his second presidency. First of all, lavish welcome, the kind of welcome that Donald Trump expects from the Middle East, and frankly, the sort of welcome that the Middle East likes to offer foreign dignitaries, and certainly one as important as Donald Trump. Saudi F-15s offered him an escort in the skies before he landed, and at the end of this lavender carpet, Mohammed bin Salman, the young crown prince, was waiting. And, so much has changed, Richard, in the course of the last 8 years. These two men have changed, and Donald Trump said, we're a little bit older, they're a bit wealthier, so therefore I'm going to get more money out of them. So this really was about economics and security, big deals, big investments, and that Donald Trump was seeking. But as you say, this extraordinary, momentous, historic speech that he gave, and I was listening to here in Riyadh about the changing shape of the Middle East.
So he came, this was clearly I don't want to say a business trip, but I would say the trade was a major focus of it because he brought all these tech leaders and what did he speak? He spoke for about an hour, something like that, maybe a little longer.
Yeah, about 45 minutes.
45 minutes? Okay. So a lot of it was about how much trade is coming, how investment. He talked about Biden. He talked about the election. So some of it is stuff that he always talks about. And then he was presenting kind of the Gulf as the model. The Gulf, you guys are doing it right. You're building the future, you're the best. No mention of democracy, no mention of human rights, no mention of the murder of that Khashoggi, the murder of the Saudi journalist. Very different kind of relationship that the U.S. and Trump has with Saudi Arabia than, say, President Biden. Trump was saying, I leave my moral judgments, I let the moral judgments happen to God. I'm just here to do deals, right? So he was like, I'm here to do deals. These guys want to do deals. Let's make a deal. Let's all get rich together.
Well, here's the thing, Richard. The US-Saudi relationship has always been transactional, always. But other US administrations have been slightly uncomfortable with that. But Donald Trump is in his the most comfortable place for him is this: the pomp and ceremony, the gifts, the investments, the big money, the being able to tell Americans the reason I come to this faraway land and choose it as the first place of my trips is because it's going to bring more money back into the United States. And frankly, he's saying, if you offer us large sums of cash, and over the course of the next few days, we're going to see trillions invested in the United States, how much of it is flash and how much actually comes into fruition and is delivered is unclear. But the headlines is what Donald Trump is seeking. And so this region, this country is quite comfortable with Donald Trump's transactional approach to business. I don't know how recently you've come to Saudi Arabia, but Saudi Arabia has transformed. There is no morality police.
Haven't been in
Young
ages. I
people,
haven't been in a
women
long
are
time.
out on the streets. You know, things have changed. Last night I was with a bunch of male colleagues and some male contacts, and they said to me, you know, just a few years ago, this would not have been permissible.
So in Saudi Arabia right now, I could go out to dinner with you and sit at the same table in any
100%.
issue. We're not married, obviously. You know, we're friends, but we don't have to play that game where we pretend
Not
to be a married
at
couple and
all.
go sit in the
100
family section.
Not at all. There's no segregation. There's no family sections. This is a place that is trying
no
to
family
move
sections
towards
anymore?
modernity. Well, no, people can sit very
not being
mixed
abided by.
in restaurants, in coffee shops. They can walk in the streets. They can be with men who aren't necessarily their husbands or partners or a relative brother. So,
'Cause there
so
used
much
to be,
about,
you know, if
of
you were a
course.
group of men, you sat in the sort of the general section, and then family section were for women or families with kids and stuff, but single men couldn't be in that section. Now it's kind of open seating plan.
Yeah, and those questions around human rights, democracy, women's rights that has always plagued this nation, including the brutal murder of Jamal Khashoggi, the contributor to the Washington Post, it feels like alongside Donald Trump's trip, this country is trying to, you know, reframe the way the world views it, that it is marching towards modernity. It is making massive strides in technological advancements. It's asking for weapon sales from the United States. It's asking for more security. And the big question, as you say, normalization, the Abraham Accords, which was seen as this deal that Donald Trump put together to normalize relations with Arab states. The big crown in the jewel was Saudi Arabia. As you say, because of the war in Gaza, while people don't publicly talk about it here in the kingdom, officials say they don't have the authority to talk about it. It is felt, and it is a condition now for the kingdom that without Palestinian statehood, we're not going to give you normalization.
Yeah, I watched the speech. You were listening to it and reporting on it. I was watching it on a monitor from here in Tehran. And it wasn't, by the way, broadcast on local TV live. I had to get it on we have like an internal system so I could get the feed. And so I watched the reaction in the room. There were lots of applause lines. You know, he talked about the investments. He was talking about MBS, the Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman. Every time he praised him, the room went wild, you know, because it's his, you know, it's friendly. He's the host, right? But when he talked about the Abraham Accords, how Saudi should join the Abraham Accords, which is that Saudi should make a peace deal and normalize relations with Israel, pretty silent. And then he said, well, Saudi's going to do that on its own time, which we want. But when he talked about that one, the room was kind of dead. So I didn't get the impression that they're going to be signing that Abraham Accord anytime soon, as long as the massive bombing campaign in Gaza continues. And what he did say about Gaza, and that it needs to the situation there needs to improve, and that it's hell on earth, or I don't remember exactly what the words. He got applause on that part, but not when he said that one day we hope that Saudi joins the Abraham Accords, and how it will be a personal favor for him if Saudi did it. That was the one time there was some pin drop in the room moment.
There is no doubt that over the course of the next 3 or 4 days, whilst he is in these Gulf states and meeting with Arab leaders, there is going to be a lot of behind the scenes, behind closed doors conversations around Benjamin Netanyahu, how he has prosecuted this conflict, how the Arab street has felt about the conflict. You know, someone young in his early 30s said to me last night that on October 6, 2023, the day before October 7, we were ready and about to sign the normalization deal. And for the Saudi youth, the young people of this country, the Palestinian issue wasn't the core issue for them, and they couldn't see why they too couldn't have a normalization. And Mohammed bin Salman was hearing this and responding to it. And of course, October 7 changed all of that and changed the dynamics of what Saudi now requires for that relationship to be normalized.
I came here because I had a feeling that Iran would be a big focus of his speech, and it was. And it was pretty tough. He was saying, Saudi Arabia, you guys, and the Gulf in general. He praised the Muscat, and he praised Doha as well as like examples of where they're doing major building and modernity and investing in the future, and that Iran is the problem. Iran is the core of all the issues. The Iranian regime is responsible for the backwardness and destruction. And he talked about the rolling power cuts. By the way, there was a power cut in Tehran today, just a few hours before he spoke. I mean, this country wants a deal, and people were I don't want to say they were afraid of a speech like this, but they're afraid if they don't get a deal that they're going to be in real troubles. I mean, this country's broke. I mean, the people they need money, they need a deal, they need sanction relief. And Trump, what he said was, Iran, you're responsible for everything. You're the worst. But I don't want to only talk about the past. Let's talk about a brighter future. But the moment is now. You got to decide. This is it. Take it or leave it. Make or break moment.
I want to make a deal with Iran. If I can make a deal with Iran, I'll be very happy if we're going to make your region and the world a safer place. But if Iran's leadership rejects this olive branch and continues to attack their neighbors, then we will have no choice but to inflict massive, maximum pressure.
And so far, we haven't heard any response from Iranian officials. I've been trying to get one. I'm supposed to get a response maybe tomorrow, maybe the next day. I think they're calculating what they want to say very carefully. Actually, I was told that. They say we don't want to give an immediate response. We want to come up with a coordinated response because they know what they say next is going to be really serious. So they didn't want to give me just sort of a quick soundbite on the phone or even agree to a quick interview tomorrow. They want to think about it, but the pressure was put on them hard. And Trump came out and said, you guys were responsible for sort of all this terrible things in the Middle East. You could debate whether they were or not, but Iran wrecked the Middle East. And look at the alternative, look at the Gulf, look what they're doing here. You can be like that and we can have a new future, or the U.S. is going to destroy you and sanction you like you've never gotten before. And people here would suffer under that because already they're suffering a lot. So it's a pivotal moment for the regime. It's a pivotal moment for the people. And if the Revolutionary Guard and the Supreme Leader look like they're just totally capitulating, that could be a real problem for them, for their whole legitimacy. So Iran is in a tough place right now. Trump just threw down the gauntlet. Take it or leave it.
Yeah, and I do think that's interesting. He is the transactional leader. He is the president who talks about the art of the deal. And when he puts out these statements on Truth Social or gives a speech sending a clear warning to a state like Iran and talks about the fact that they backed the Houthis who were still launching rockets, even though Donald Trump said, that's been resolved. They'll stop doing that. Even today there were sirens in Tel Aviv because of the Houthis. So that necessarily hasn't stopped. Or he talked about decapitating Hezbollah, the Israelis decapitating Hezbollah, but that was a group that destroyed Lebanon. He said, and this is now a real opportunity for the Lebanese. But of course, the backing, the funding of all of that came from the Iranians. So the Iranians are not only facing, and we've talked about this on the podcast before, domestic pressure, but their whole axis of resistance, and axis of evil, as it's known in some circles, has been decapitated across the region. So, as you say, they need this deal. What I think is really quite fascinating is how far the Saudis have come. You'll remember 8 years ago when Donald Trump ripped up the JCPOA, the nuclear deal that Barack Obama put together.
The Obama era Iran.
Correct.
Deal.
The Saudis. The Saudis celebrated that, and Mohammed bin Salman celebrated that. But how far has Saudi Arabia now come with its rival Iran, where it's saying to Donald Trump, you know what, we want peace in this region. We don't want instability. Sign this deal, this nuclear deal with Iran. Do it your way, but actually we no longer want you to rip these deals up. We want you to come up with something with the Iranians. And then we heard words of wisdom from Donald Trump in that speech, where he talked about not making this region a region that's full of strife and conflict and turmoil, but making it a place of opportunity.
I think some of the quotes, I wrote them down. Is like, we want was trade, not terrorism, and he had this speech was crafted. It wasn't just all off the cuff. He talked about how in the past, clear references to Bush and Obama. There's been the neocons and the nation builders who destroyed more nations than they ever built. And he doesn't want any of that business. He just wants to do deals. And look what's going on in Saudi Arabia and the Gulf. They're making deals. They're making money. Everybody's getting rich. And Iran, you can get, you can join this too, but you got to do it now. And as you said, Iran, we'll get to our predictions later. I think we're going to get to a framework of a deal here, because Iran does need this deal.
I just want to talk about, before we go into Syria, what has been an extraordinary development as well, Richard, in the last couple of days has been this notion that the United States and Hamas are talking to each other via intermediaries. And so the big question then is, where is Benjamin Netanyahu in all of this? And of course, we saw the American-Israeli hostage being released as a gesture of goodwill or whatever it might be. The last remaining American-Israeli hostage, Idan Alexander, coming out of Gaza, being handed over to the Israelis, greeted by his family. And this was, I guess, an attempt by Steve Witkoff, Donald Trump's special envoy, who's been zippering around, trying to come up with the nuclear deal with the Iranians, trying to get the Ukrainians and the Russians round a negotiating table, and also trying to restart the ceasefire talks in Gaza.
Pressure on Netanyahu. That side deal puts a lot of pressure.
It puts a huge amount, because Benjamin Netanyahu at the moment is being seen, and a very clear message is being sent to the Israeli people via Steve Witkoff, via the Americans, that Benjamin Netanyahu is unnecessarily dragging this bloodshed and conflict on without any real strategy or without a real purpose. That deal that took place then within a few hours, Idan Alexander was released by Hamas, just goes to show how easily the other 20 or so hostages can be released if Benjamin Netanyahu comes to the negotiating table and does this properly. But a clear message was sent to the Israeli people that Benjamin Netanyahu is there to serve his right-wing MPs and not actually the Israeli people.
In that square, those families have been angry at Netanyahu, saying, you're dragging your feet, do a deal, get these people out. You're not doing a deal because you're trying to appease the right-wing extremist members of your government, so you're needlessly dragging on this bloody war. Just do a deal and get those hostages out. And the fact that the Trump administration did a side deal and that Hamas, did it pretty easily. It's like, sure, you want the guy? Here. And they handed him out without the theater. They didn't give him the stupid goodie bags. They didn't put him up on a stage. They didn't do all that stuff that they've been criticized for doing, which has been awful and a spectacle. It was just, okay, you want him? Here. Goodbye. Have a nice day. And that sends a message to all the people who've been criticizing Netanyahu that says, we were right. You can do a deal. We can get these people out, and just just do it. So therefore, why aren't you doing it?
You know, the Israeli people are now focused on a election that could come up, and you know, Benjamin Netanyahu is backed up into a corner, and frankly, this week he will feel incredibly isolated with all of these Arab leaders rallying around the U.S. president, and Benjamin Netanyahu is nowhere to be seen. But let's take that break, and when I come back, I want to hear more about your Syrian trip, what you saw, what you heard, and link it back to what is happening here in Riyadh. So, Richard, as we were saying, a lot's being discussed around the Middle East, foreign policy, from Iran to the situation in Gaza. Saudi Arabia, Donald Trump talked about Mohammed bin Salman in sort of you know, like he really admired him and talked about this great leader, called him an extraordinary
what
man.
I do for you, I love you too much.
But
I
you know,
like
he
you
put
too
himself.
Much, he kept saying.
He kept saying, you know, I like you too much. But that is sort of the nature of Donald Trump and the relationship that he's built. And he does see Mohammed bin Salman, Vladimir Putin, Xi Jinping as his equals on the international stage. The sort of respect he has for these strong men is not the sort of respect that he has for European allies and partners.
Certainly not.
But one of the things that got a huge amount of applause at this, speech that he gave here in Riyadh, standing ovation, was the lifting of sanctions on the Syrian leader Ahmad al-Sharaa and
on all of Syria.
on Syria, on all of Syria. It got a standing ovation. And what Donald Trump said was the things I do for the Crown Prince. Just talk us through, because Ahmad al-Sharaa is due to meet Donald Trump tomorrow, you know, here in Saudi Arabia. But just talk us through what you saw, the energy in Syria, and the hopes for the Syrian people.
This guy was an Al-Qaeda leader. This job is fascinating, and how things change. So we did one of our first shows from Damascus. It was about 6 months ago, when Damascus was falling and the government of Syria was falling. So there was the government of Syria, and I'm not going to retell the whole story of the Syrian civil war. It's too long, but basically there was this decade-long civil war against Bashar al-Assad. It had won. It was all more or less over. Bashar al-Assad had won. There was just one little pocket that was right along the Syrian border, the Turkish border, excuse me, that was held by a group of pretty hardcore Islamist rebels led by Ahmed al-Sharaa, who used to be known then as al-Jolani. We didn't, you know, he didn't use his real name. And then about 6 months ago, after Hezbollah was defeated, and Hezbollah had been propping up Bashar al-Assad, and after Iran was severely weakened, the Assad government instantly collapsed, and these rebels who had been confined to was one pocket of Syria started marching out and taking territory, and the regime just fell in front of them. And when we were there in Damascus, you saw people had just the soldiers had just abandoned their uniforms in the streets, and there were tanks that were just sort of parked by the roadside. The regime didn't fight. It collapsed. They ran away, and the rebels swept into power. And for the last 6 months, they have been in charge, and they've been trying to arrive at this moment. They've been talking about how they want to open a new page, that they're not just Islamist hardcore rebels, that they want to engage in international diplomacy. So Ahmed al-Sharaa was once a senior Al-Qaeda leader named by Ayman al-Zawahiri, who was then the number two, he's now dead, number two leader in Al-Qaeda, just below Osama bin Laden. He says he's changed, he's changed his tune. And by all accounts, he has sort of changed his tune, and he was meeting with Macron, and he's traveling the world, and he wants the sanctions to be lifted, and he wants the Syria to be sort of welcomed back into the international community.
But you were just with these guys in Syria.
So I was just with these guys. So let me tell you what I was doing in Syria, and I wish I were with them right at this moment, because they're going to be dancing and really, really, really happy, because they were looking for this moment. So this movement, HTS, which is now the new Syrian government, Islamists, they've been consciously going out of their way to tell Syrians, and there's some problems with the old Alawite community, and there's some problems with the Druze community. It's not all settled, but I would say the overwhelming message that they have been projecting and acting on is that they want to start a new page. They couldn't have been nicer to me. I was in Syria on this special mission to try and find and recover the remains of foreign hostages, Americans, Brits, Japanese man, all the foreign hostages that were held by a particularly brutal group of ISIS members known as the Beatles, in an area that had been inaccessible before. And the new Syrian government brought us there. And they brought a team of international investigators. The Qataris put on the plane and sent all the equipment and paid for the whole expedition. We landed in the C-17, the huge military transport plane, full of search and rescue team, full of crime scene investigators, full of SWAT team. They arrived. They had their equipment, ground penetrating sonar. There was a group called the Sufan Group, and you may know I'm sure you know the group.
Yes.
And they do sort of investigators, and they've been working pro bono on behalf of the families of the hostages to try and locate their remains for years. And they had pinpointed this spot that I went to outside of Aleppo as an area of interest. And they've been trying to go there, but they couldn't get there because of the active fighting. They got to the scene. The new Syrian government, which is now being recognized, provided a lot of the security, escorted us there, and it looked something like a cross between an archaeological dig, because they put stakes down and lines, and we're going grid by grid, looking at this hilltop where ISIS had filmed at least one video showing the partial remains of an American hostage. So they knew they wanted to go there, and then they started digging with excavators, sometimes with shovels, pickaxes, paintbrushes, and they found remains. They found remains where they thought they were going to find them, and they're doing DNA analysis right now. And it may have been the spot. We're not going to know who they found until the DNA analysis is done. But they're hoping that they find the remains of at least one,
and is that,
or maybe several of the foreign hostages who were executed brutally by ISIS.
And is that report coming out soon, Richard?
Well, I've written one piece. I did a TV piece, about a 4-minute piece, and we'll put the links to both of those, and then we'll be following up on the story as we get the DNA analysis, because it would give the families so much closure. Because not only were their loved ones kidnapped, treated horrendously during the captivity. There's the story of this young American aid worker, Kayla Mueller, who became the bride. Bride's not the right word when you're forced and you're kidnapped, but that's the way they considered her, to Baghdadi, to the leader of ISIS. She became his personal.
Wow.
She became his personal property, and so each one of these stories has a fascinating but horrific backstory as well. It's a story I've also been following for quite a few years. So I'm going to be doing a lot more on that coming forward. I've interviewed several of the family members. There's more to come, but we're starting to roll out some of that material as we get it, and the mission is now underway to actively find the remains for the first time since these people were executed a decade ago.
Extraordinary. And we'll definitely, as you say, put the links of those stories to this podcast so our listeners can have a look at some of your reportage from Syria and, of course, Iran. But Richard, let's get to our predictions now, because there's so much going on in the region. You are in Iran at the moment. I've been doing a couple of weeks of reporting on and we've talked about it on the podcast, the war, the escalation and the tensions between India and Pakistan, a series of interviews that I did that really exploded
you were really on
in
top
the
of that
region.
from the beginning.
Yeah, and I think that one of the things about the India-Pakistan conflicts in the past and the fact that Kashmir is always a flashpoint is that people don't really have a firm understanding of it. So I think that's why it was perhaps the pieces, the interviews I did quite well. But what I think I find most alarming, and this is kind of my prediction of the situation between India and Pakistan, which, by the way, Donald Trump stepped in and described himself as a savior. Which Pakistan welcomed
had
and
Rubio,
India
said Michael
found
Rubio,
absolutely.
Please stand up and take an applause. Yeah,
India absolutely abhors the idea of Donald Trump stepping in and publicly declaring that he was the one to defuse the situation, because India sees itself as a great power, both regionally and internationally. Pakistan is much weaker. So it wants other great powers to be, tangled up and telling India to step back from the brink. Of course, India found this incredibly frustrating. And now Donald Trump is saying, hey, you guys have to come up with a deal when it comes to Kashmir, and putting them both on equal footings, which has completely incensed the Indians. But I think what my prediction is that while at this moment in time, this situation has been diffused, the red lines have moved and the baseline has moved, and certain red lines were crossed in this particular escalation, which means the next time that these two nations confront each other, these two nuclear rivals confront each other, it could become a more dangerous conflict. So I think we've put a lid on it for now, but there is no doubt that the tensions are simmering under the surface.
All right. My prediction, and I'm sort of putting my feet where my prediction is why I came here. I think they do come up with some sort of framework agreement on Iran. It's too close, and there's too many reasons for the Iranian leadership on all different levels to take it. There's too many reasons for that the Iranian people want it. Trump can get a better deal than the one that President Obama got. He could get them to enrich to a lower level than they had before. He could get better, more observers. There've already been teams from the international organization, the International Atomic Energy Agency, here talking about how they could resume their observations, and the money thing. There are about $7 billion of frozen Iranian assets, and they're held by Qatar. They're just sitting there. And last time, when Obama signed the deal, there were frozen assets then too. The money went back to Iran. And it's something that President Trump keeps talking about. He talked about it again today, how the pallets of money went back to Iran. And what did they do? They bought weapons with it. And he thinks that led to October 7th, that led to Hamas, and led to the disaster in the Middle East. So he doesn't want to be blamed for that, to sign a deal and then have this $7 billion go right back to the regime, back to the military here, let's say. But you could easily find a framework where the money is unfrozen, and then the clause says, okay, that money will be spent in the U.S. and that money will be unfrozen and buy things that Iranians need, like medical equipment or airplane parts for their civilian aircraft or whatever it is. And then Trump can go back and say, not only did I get these hundreds of billions of dollars in trade and opened up Syria, but we at least got a framework agreement on Iran. So I think I can see a deal like that emerging over time. I'm starting to see the framework kind of emerging in the dust.
Really fascinating, Richard, and no doubt we'll probably find you again in Tehran in the near future as this deal evolves. But great to see you again. We haven't spoken in the last week or so, so it's
I was
great
totally
to connect
incommunicado.
and
This place
hear
in Syria
about.
was in the middle of no place.
I know, extraordinary. I'm really looking forward to seeing your pieces and hearing more about your trip to Iran when I see you next. Thank
And
you
it was
to
the site of
our
the Islamic
listeners, as
apocalypse.
always.
You know, it's a symbolic reason. There's all sorts of,
Yeah.
it's cool stuff. It's a fascinating place, and you got to sort of get into the ISIS mentality. The reason they picked that spot is they thought it would be where there would be a final end of days battle between the armies of Islam and the armies of the Crusaders. So that's why they thought this spot was particularly significant to execute people, because it was sort of the
Wow.
Armageddon site. Until we meet
Gosh.
again, Yalda. Always a pleasure.
Absolutely.
Great to see you.
And always a pleasure. Thank you to our listeners for listening. Send us your thoughts at the usual place, theworld@sky.uk, and follow us wherever you get your podcasts, Apple or Spotify. Goodbye for now.